Apple Podcast title, The Deep Dive, the 2015-16 NHL season rule changes, rookies, and the Canadian playoff drought. Apple Podcast description. Dive into the 2015-16 NHL season, a historic turning point in hockey history. We unpack the Wikipedia archives to explore major NHL rule changes like the introduction of 3-on-3 overtime and the NFL-style Coaches Challenge. We track the generational shift from departing legends and crazy Jaromir Jagr milestones to the explosive Connor McDavid rookie year. Plus, we break down the unprecedented Canadian NHL team's playoff drought, the chaos of the John Scott All-Star Game, and the incredible Pittsburgh Penguins championship run. Whether you're a diehard fan or just fascinated by how a 99-year-old institution adapts to the digital age, this deep dive delivers the stats, stories, and aha moments of a transformative year on the ice.
Welcome to the deep dive. I'm really glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, we have a fantastic one lined up.
We really do. So
Yeah.
I want you to imagine a 99-year-old institution. It is deeply steeped in tradition, intensely beloved by millions of diehard fans. But suddenly, it looks in the mirror and realizes, well, it needs a fundamental facelift.
A massive one.
Right. It has to completely overhaul how it operates, how it presents its product to the world, and even who makes up its workforce. And that is exactly the scenario the National Hockey League faced heading into the 2015-16 NHL season.
It really was a watershed moment. You know, when you study the history of professional hockey, there are these long periods of stasis, and then there are these explosive pivot points where everything just shifts at once. This season was absolutely one of those tipping points.
For sure. And for this deep dive, we are pulling from a highly comprehensive Wikipedia archives covering the entirety of the 2015-16 NHL season. Our mission today is to extract the most fascinating insights from this archive and explore why this specific year was such a monumental transition for the sport.
There's a lot to cover.
Oh, there is. We're looking at the rewriting of fundamental rules, massive demographic and generational shifts, and some truly bizarre statistical anomalies. So whether you're a lifelong hockey fan or just someone fascinated by how massive corporate institutions adapt to the modern era, there is a lot to uncover here. Okay, let's unpack this.
Where are we starting?
Starting with the structural changes to the game itself.
That is definitely the best place to start because in June of 2015, the NHL's Board of Governors convened and approved a slate of NHL rule changes that fundamentally altered the geometry, the pacing, and really the biomechanics of the sport.
Yeah, I was looking through the list of those changes in the sources, and the one that immediately jumps out is the introduction of 3-on-3 overtime.
Oh, yeah.
Because for the previous 15 years, regular season overtime had been played 4-on-4. So what was the catalyst for suddenly stripping another player off the ice?
What's fascinating here is the underlying philosophy behind that decision. The league had a very specific problem, and that problem was the shootout. When the shootout was first introduced, I think after the 2005 lockout, it was a wildly entertaining novelty. People loved it. But by 2015, it had basically devolving into an artificial skills competition.
Like a gimmick?
Exactly. It was essentially a coin flip deciding crucial points in the standings. So by going to 3-on-3, the NHL wasn't just tweaking a rule for entertainment. They were making a calculated move to emphasize speed and open ice. They were hoping the actual flow of hockey would determine the winner before a shootout was even necessary.
I remember reading about the immediate tactical fallout of that. Coaches initially thought it would be this chaotic back-and-forth pond hockey, but didn't they quickly realize it was entirely about puck possession?
Precisely. The strategy evolved almost overnight. Instead of rushing the net and risking a turnover, players would cross the offensive blue line, realize they didn't have a clear shot, and literally skate the puck all the way back into their own defensive zone.
Just to reset.
Just to reset and maintain possession. Because the open ice was so vast that a single turnover was an almost guaranteed odd man rush the other way. And just as a fun piece of historical trivia, it was actually Jason Garrison of the Tampa Bay Lightning who scored the first ever 3-on-3 overtime goal that October, beating the Philadelphia Flyers.
Okay, so that structural shift makes total sense. But the league didn't stop there. They also introduced the Coaches Challenge, which seemed, heavily inspired by the NFL.
He was directly inspired by the NFL. They had been using a challenge system since 1999. In the NHL, a coach could now use their timeout to challenge a play, specifically looking at whether a goal was offside or if there was goaltender interference.
And if they were wrong.
If the challenge failed, they lost their timeout.
Right. But the implementation of that caused a lot of friction, didn't it? I saw in the sources that it completely changed the dynamic on the bench.
Oh, it created an intense new layer of strategic risk management. Suddenly you have assistant coaches staring at ice-level tablet monitors, trying to make a split-second decision on whether a player's skate blade was, a millimeter off the ice at the blue line 40 seconds before a goal was actually scored.
Which is crazy to think about.
It is. On one hand, it ensured the rules were applied with surgical precision, but on the other hand, it infuriated fans because a beautiful high-skill goal could be erased due to a microscopic technicality that had no actual bearing on the play.
Speaking of technicalities that shift the balance of play, there was a new face-off rule that sounds incredibly minor on paper, but seems like a massive deal for the players.
The stick rule.
Yes. On any face-off not at center ice, the defensive player now had to put his stick down on the ice first.
It sounds like a footnote,
Yeah.
I know. But if you look at the biomechanics of a face-off, it is a complete game changer. When you are forced to put your stick down first, you are physically anchored. You're stuck. You have shown your hand and limited your range of motion. So the attacking center gets a split-second advantage because they can react to your positioning. The league was intentionally engineering the rules at a micro level to give attacking teams a head start on puck possession, which theoretically leads to more offense.
For you listening, think about how that concept translates to your own environment. Consider how changing one tiny operational rule in your workplace, like who is required to speak first in a negotiation or who sets the agenda for a meeting, can completely shift the balance of power and the output of a team.
That's a great way to look at it.
The NHL was basically redesigning its entire system to force a specific result.
And while the league was redesigning its rulebook, the actual workforce executing those rules was undergoing a historic transformation of its own.
That brings us to the changing face of the league, because the demographic data in the sources points to a massive tipping point regarding the origin of these players.
It was a staggering milestone for a sport that has always been deeply tied to a specific national identity. For the first time in the history of the NHL, Canadian-born players did not make up the absolute majority of the league.
That is wild.
Over the first 2 weeks of the season, the percentage of Canadian players dropped to 49.7%.
I mean, that has to be an existential crisis for hockey purists in Canada. If the Canadians are dropping below half, who is filling those roster spots?
It perfectly illustrates the globalization of the talent pool. The sources note that American-born players surged to make up 24.2% of the league. You had a record 9.1% coming from Sweden and 4.5% from Russia.
So it's spreading out.
Exactly. The NHL was no longer just a North American league with a few European stars sprinkled in. It had become a truly global ocean of talent.
And it wasn't just geography that was shifting, right? It was a profound generational turnover. The 2015-16 season marked the arrival of some wildly hyped rookies. This was the highly anticipated Connor McDavid rookie year.
Oh yeah, the hype was unreal.
Coming in as the first overall pick for the Edmonton Oilers, you also had Jack Eichel debuting in Buffalo and Artemi Panarin bursting onto the scene for the Chicago Blackhawks, ultimately winning the Calder Memorial Trophy as Rookie of the Year.
The contrast on the ice that season was incredible, because right alongside McDavid's hyper-speed modern game, you had absolute legends skating their final laps. Pavel Datsyuk, a player who had essentially owned the Selke Trophy as the league's best defensive forward, was playing his final season for the Red Wings.
And Vincent Lecavalier, too.
Yes, Lecavalier, a former Rocket Richard winner as the league's top goal scorer, he retired after finishing the year with the Kings.
And hovering above all of this generational turnover is the ageless wonder himself. The Jaromir Jagr milestones from this particular season read like a misprint.
They really do.
He was in his mid-40s, playing for the Florida Panthers, and he just casually passes Brett Hull for third on the NHL all-time goals list. And then a few weeks later, he passes Gordie Howe for third in career points.
It is the perfect juxtaposition of eras. Jagr played a massive, old-school puck protection style of game. He survived the clutching and grabbing era of the 90s, and here he is, setting records that seem mathematically impossible.
While sharing the ice with guys like McDavid.
Exactly. Sharing the ice with McDavid, who represents the absolute apex of the new speed-driven NHL. Oh, and meanwhile, Alexander Ovechkin is quietly hammering home his 500th career goal.
It's fascinating to watch an entire profession evolve in real time. Imagine being in a room with a retiring senior partner who literally wrote the foundational textbooks for your industry, is sitting across the table from a 22-year-old prodigy who is already rewriting the entire workflow using new technology.
That's exactly what it felt like.
That electric tension, that passing of the torch, that was the NHL every single night.
But that tension wasn't confined to the ice. The business of hockey was experiencing its own massive upheaval behind closed doors.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we are pivoting from the locker room to the boardroom. The NHL clearly realized that running a successful sports league wasn't enough anymore. They needed to operate like a cutting-edge tech and media company.
Right.
In August of 2015, they announced a landmark 6-year partnership with MLB Advanced Media, or MLBAM. Wait, why would a hockey league hand the keys to its digital kingdom over to a baseball company?
Because MLBAM was the undisputed gold standard for live streaming infrastructure at the time. They were a tech spin-off of Major League Baseball that had built the back end for things like HBO now.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, they were huge. The NHL recognized they were competing in a highly lucrative, entirely digital media landscape, and their in-house streaming just wasn't keeping up. So they handed over the technical operations of their websites, their mobile apps, and their out-of-market streaming services to baseball's tech geniuses.
The sources mentioned they relaunched NHL.com and the streaming apps to support 60 frames per second video, which is obviously crucial for a sport as fast as hockey. Though it wasn't exactly a smooth launch, was it?
No, it was actually quite rocky. When they flipped the switch in February 2016, a failure in their content delivery network caused massive glitches and stream crashes.
The servers that actually pushed the video data out.
Right. But the strategic ambition was what mattered. The NHL even took an equity stake in BAMTech. They weren't just renting server space. They were investing in the underlying technology.
So they are pouring millions into their digital footprint, but they were also expanding their physical footprint. For the first time since the year 2000, the league ended its moratorium on expansion. They started vetting serious franchise bids from Las Vegas, led by Bill Foley's Black Knight Sports, and from Quebec City by Quevoir.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see a league hedging its bets. Quebec City offered a deeply passionate, historic market, but it came with the economic risk of a fluctuating Canadian dollar.
Right, which had hurt them in the past.
Exactly. Las Vegas, on the other hand, was a complete blank slate. It offered massive corporate entertainment money and a chance to be the first major professional sports team in a rapidly growing, untraditional market. It was a clear signal of where the league's business priorities were heading.
And speaking of massive corporate money, we have to talk about how teams were spending their cash. Because the coaching carousel went completely off the rails this season. The Toronto Maple Leafs signed Mike Babcock to an 8-year, $50 million contract for a head coach.
It completely shattered the market paradigm for coaching talent. You have to remember the constraints these teams were operating under. The salary cap for player spending was locked at $71.4 million that season.
Okay.
In a salary cap league, you simply cannot buy a championship by hoarding the most expensive players.
So they look for a loophole.
Exactly. There is no salary cap on coaches, general managers, or front office staff. The Maple Leafs, who have practically infinite financial resources, leveraged that might to acquire what they believed was the biggest competitive advantage available off the ice. It was an arms race shifting from player salaries to executive salary.
Okay, so we have a league meticulously engineering its rules for speed, investing in baseball's streaming tech, and teams spending $50 million on coaches. But despite all this calculated corporate planning, sports remain wonderfully weird and chaotic.
Very true.
Which brings us to the quirks and anomalies of the season.
And this season delivered some of the most memorable anomalies in modern sports history.
Let's look at the outdoor games first. The Winter Classic was held at Gillette Stadium in Massachusetts, where the Montreal Canadiens routed the Boston Bruins. But the sources highlight a much more significant milestone that happened the day before.
Yes, the first ever Women's Winter Classic. The Boston Pride of the NWHL played Les Canadiens of the CWHL to a 1-1 tie.
It is hard to overstate the importance of that exposure. Putting women's professional hockey on that massive stadium-sized stage alongside the NHL's marquee event was a huge step forward in visibility.
Absolutely.
But while that was a highly orchestrated event, the All-Star Game in Nashville was hijacked by absolute chaos.
The John Scott saga. It is a perfect case study in what happens when a sanitized corporate league collides with the chaotic democracy of internet culture.
Break that down for me. The league introduces this new, highly competitive 3-on-3 divisional tournament format for for the All-Star game. They open up the captaincy to a fan vote, and the fans mobilize en masse to vote in John Scott.
Right. A journeyman enforcer who had scored something like 5 goals in his entire career.
The league was terrified.
Oh, they panicked. They are trying to present this polished, high-skill showcase to their new digital audience, and the internet essentially trolls them by voting for the guy who represents the dying breed of pure fistfighters. The NHL actually tried to make the problem disappear.
How so?
Scott was abruptly traded and subsequently demoted to the minor leagues, which many fans suspected was orchestrated specifically to make him ineligible for the game.
But the backlash was so severe they had to backpedal and let him play. And you cannot script what happened next.
Not at all. He goes to Nashville, scores 2 goals, his team wins the tournament, and the fans vote him the All-Star Game MVP.
That is amazing.
It completely flipped from a corporate PR nightmare into one of the most authentic, feel-good sports stories of the decade. It proved that fans crave relatable human narratives just as much as they crave elite skill.
That is incredible. But perhaps the most shocking anomaly of the entire year, and certainly a huge point of interest in our deep dive, was the Canadian NHL team's playoff drought.
It is a statistical mindbender.
Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, all 7 Canadian-based franchises completely failed to qualify for the Stanley Cup playoffs. In a league where more than half the teams make the postseason, how does an entire country get shut out?
The math alone is highly improbable. According to the sources, this was only the second time in the league's near century of existence that the playoff field consisted entirely of United States-based teams.
When's the other time?
The only other time it happened was the 1969-70 season, when there were only 12 teams in the league and only 2 of them are Canadian.
I can only imagine the panic in the broadcasting boardrooms up north.
It was a disaster for the networks. Hockey is deeply woven into the national identity of Canada, and the broadcasting rights are built entirely around the expectation of deep, multi-round playoff runs by Canadian teams.
So the ratings just tanked.
Having 0 representation meant a massive drop in viewership and advertising revenue. It really underscored just how brutally competitive the league's parity had become.
And that parity brings us to the ultimate conclusion of the season, the Pittsburgh Penguins championship run. When you look at their trajectory, it feels like a total rejection of the meticulous planning we discussed earlier.
It is the ultimate irony. In December of that season, the Penguins were floundering with a 15-10-3 record. They looked sluggish. They didn't look anything like a Stanley Cup contender.
So they fired their head coach, Mike Johnston. Usually, a midseason firing means the front office is waving the white flag and looking toward next year's draft.
Right, but instead of bringing in a high-priced veteran coach like Toronto did with Babcock, they promote Mike Sullivan from their minor league affiliate in the AHL.
And what did Sullivan do differently?
He recognized exactly what the new NHL rules were trying to promote: speed. He unleashed the Penguins to play an incredibly fast, aggressive north-south transition game. Suddenly, a roster that looked slow and disconnected became an unstoppable buzzsaw.
And they just took over.
They tore through the second half of the season, marched through the Stanley Cup playoffs, and dismantled the San Jose Sharks in 6 games to win the Cup, with Sidney Crosby capturing the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP.
It is amazing. We spent this entire deep dive talking about the NHL's boardroom strategies. They redesigned the rulebook to engineer more speed. They partnered with baseball's tech sector to upgrade their streaming. Teams were dropping $50 million on coaching contracts to secure off-ice advantages.
And yet, the ultimate prize was captured by a franchise that threw its original blueprint out the window in December, promoted a minor league coach, and rode a chaotic wave of momentum to a title. You can engineer the systems and manage the business all you want, but the game is still fundamentally played on the ice.
So what does this all mean when you step back and look at the whole picture of the 2015-16 season?
If we synthesize all these threads, it proves that even a legacy institution cannot survive on its history alone. You have to relentlessly adapt. You must be willing to change your fundamental rules when your product gets stale. You have to upgrade your infrastructure to meet your audience where they actually are, even if it means partnering with outside experts.
And embracing new talent.
Yes, you have to embrace the changing demographics of your talent. But crucially, you also have to accept that you cannot control every variable. The magic of human endeavor still happens in the unpredictable margins.
I think that is a brilliant takeaway. And it brings me to a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over today. Think back to the very first topic we discussed, the creation of 3-on-3 overtime. The NHL changed its rules specifically because they wanted to kill the shootout. They realized the shootout was an artificial constraint, a coin flip, that didn't reflect the true nature of the game.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted pure skill and open ice to decide the winner instead.
Right.
It raises an important question for you to consider in your own professional or personal life. How many artificial shootouts or quick fixes have you created to resolve difficult situations? Maybe it is a rigid, weekly status meeting that doesn't actually solve problems, an arbitrary deadline you set just to force a decision, or a shortcut you regularly take to avoid a complex conversation. What would happen if you changed your own rules? What would happen if you stripped away those artificial constraints, opened up the ice, and let pure skill, critical thinking, and authentic effort determine your outcomes instead?
That's a powerful thought.
Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us in this deep dive into a truly transformative year in sports history. Keep digging into the sources around you, keep questioning the rules of the game, and we will catch you next time.